I'm gonna read for us Revelation 18, verse 1 down to verse 13. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues, for her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, 'I sit enthroned as queen. I'm not a widow. I will never mourn.' Therefore, in one day, her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, 'Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour your doom has come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
If you watch a documentary about a historical event, it happened, like September is coming, and there'll be, documentaries they show about September 11th. And when you watch a documentary, there's different kinds of things that they show you. Sometimes they'll show you video and footage of actually what happened. They'll show you pictures. Sometimes they'll have an expert who sort of explains like what was going on from a scientific point of view. Or they might show you some statistics or graphs or things like that. But one thing that they usually do, and it's one of the most powerful and emotionally weighty parts of anything like that, is to show you eyewitness testimony, right? They'll put a microphone in front of somebody who was there, who saw it happen, and they'll have them recount their experience. And what does that do? What does that add to it? Well, it allows you to kind of put yourself in their shoes and to sort of relive that experience that, through their eyes. Right? And it helps us think of the human impact of the event. Now, that's kind of what's happened in Revelation 18. If you remember several weeks ago, Revelation 17, it talked about the fall of Babylon. And it described basically how that happened. Because remember, Babylon is for the people of John's day, when they heard Babylon and they read what John had to say about Babylon, who did they immediately think of? They thought of Rome. They thought of the greatest city that they knew of. They thought of the city of Rome. Again, Babylon at this time was a speck. It didn't matter really at all as a city. So when we talk about Babylon, it was clearly a symbol for the city of Rome of their day. And it was just unthinkable. Rome seemed invincible. It seemed so powerful. It seemed like Rome would last forever. But John in Revelation 17 tells us, oh no, the doom of the great city that rebels against God is sure. And now here in chapter 18, what we get is sort of the emotional impact, we might say, that this has on people. We get the microphone put in people's faces and we hear what they have to say, what they feel about the fall of Babylon or the fall of Rome. This is important, just to give you kind of a heads up what's going on in Revelation. Like, Revelation has been setting up enemies to knock down. Revelation has been telling us who our enemy is. It starts off with the dragon, right? The mighty dragon. And then it showed us who represents the devil, right? And the dragon had two powerful agents, the beast and the false prophet. And the last enemy that introduced was this lady named Babylon, right? And now in reverse order, it's going to show all of those enemies being knocked down. First, we're going to read about how the mother of prostitutes, Babylon, is taken down. And then it'll be about the beast and the false prophet's fall. And finally, we'll read about the fall of the dragon. So Revelation is showing these enemies that seem so fearsome are actually being toppled. Now, let's think for a second about why there's this attack on Rome. Like, is Rome the only bad place in the world? No, of course not. But Rome is a bit of a symbol. And it's a symbol for any city or any superpower or any human system that promotes idolatry and persecutes the people of God. Promotes idols and persecutes the people of God. And that's exactly how they're depicted here. About 1,600 years ago, our older brother in Christ, Augustine, wrote a famous book called The City of God. And in that book, before he talks about the city that God is building, the eternal city, he talks about the city of man. And he says we need to understand that there's a sinful city. It's a sinful world system. He describes it as the city of this world, the earthly city, or the city of man. So he says we see then that these two cities, the city of God, the city of man, are created by two kinds of love. The earthly city was created by self-love, reaching the point of contempt for God. So in other words, you put a bunch of people together that have contempt for God. The kind of contempt that we saw displayed in the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics. That kind of contempt. You put those folks together, they create a system, they create a city. We call it the city of man. Scholar James Smith says this: the earthly city is a disordered configuration of creaturely life. Disordered. That's not the way creatures are supposed to be. It's not the way we as God's creation, we're not supposed to look like that, we're not supposed to think like that, we're not supposed to act like that, but that's how we act, the culture of the city of man. He says, Augustine's analysis of the earthly city is cautionary, calling Christians to recognize that cultural systems, like we live in, are fundamentally disordered. And Christians need to resist those systems and to reorder those systems. So we live in the fallen city. We live in Babylon. It's home. We need to resist the sinful culture, and we need to reorder the our sinful human culture. So that's something, I think what Augustine meant when he said the city of man is quite similar to the symbol of Rome, the symbol of Babylon in the book of Revelation. And again, the announcement simply in Revelation is it's over. Like Babylon is doomed. Now we'll see that it's going to be something that's going to happen far in the future, but it's announcing the sure and certain doom of all such idle, disordered human systems. And by the way, Rome, you say, well, it seems like it's already passed because Rome is gone. But what we need to know, as we already saw in the last chapter, Babylon is something that it dies 1,000 deaths, and it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back. One Babylon falls, and the enemy's already cooking up a second one. I'm not sure about this, but it seems to me that our enemy, the dragon, it would be in his best interest to have little Babylons cooking up all around the world, so that when one of them falls, he's ready to replace it with another one. And I think that explains a lot of what we see around the world today. So new Babylons are always on the horizon. Notice it says in verse 2, the angel comes down, he says, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons." Become. That means used to not be a dwelling for demons, but now she's a dwelling for demons. And that means that there's human systems that start out harmless, that start out okay, but gradually as they grow stronger, they become demon-possessed. They become the haunt for every demon. And we should expect that to happen. We shouldn't be surprised when that happens. Now, another thing that this is pointing out is the connection between idols and demons. And that's really important for us to see. Now, if you've been a missionary before in countries, and maybe in Asia or something like that, you get an opportunity to see the connection between idolatry and the work of demons very closely. Sometimes it's very, very obvious. But we live in a country that doesn't seem to have an idolatry problem. right? You don't see idols. We don't. Americans seem to not worship anything, right? We seem to not really worship. But we have to think for a second about what idolatry is. Okay, sometimes, here, let me show you, we can broaden our category of idolatry a little bit. When I was in Taiwan, there was people that would literally go to a temple and they would bow down to a statue. That one's easy. Like, that's idolatry. I know this one. That's the sin of idolatry. Second commandment right there. Let's try to expand that a little. Why is idolatry wrong? Because you are taking something that should only be given to God, worship, and you're giving it to someone else. Okay, so that's bad. That's the first form of idolatry, taking worship from God and giving it to someone else. Okay, but is it acceptable? You're going to give you a second little follow-up question. Is it acceptable for a human being to just try not to give their worship to anybody? No. That's idolatry too. You are robbing God of his worship. Okay? So America may not look like an idol, a nation that has a problem with idolatry. But do we have a worship problem in this country? Oh yeah. Does this look like a nation of people that worships God? No, of course it doesn't. Because what does worship look like? Well, first of all, worship looks like being a Christian. We only can approach God the Father through his Son, Jesus Christ. If you don't know God through his Son, Jesus, you don't know God. So there ain't no worship going on. You don't know him. You're not a Christian. The Bible plays no part. God's word plays no part in your life. There's no prayer, no fear of God. You don't go to church. Your mouth isn't filled with God's praises. Like a country that looks like that is a country that doesn't know how to worship. Ergo, it is a country that is filled with idolatry. America is a quite idolatrous nation because it is a nation that routinely robs God of his worship. If you rob God of his worship, guess what? You're Babylon. That's what's going on. Babylon is all about, and this is what the work of demons is in our world, right? We don't try to learn about what demons do from watching horror movies. Demons are in the business of worship. They're in the business of making sure that you have whatever you need to not worship God. Worship is a big deal, okay? Worship is a very big deal. The fact that we participate in Christian worship is a very big deal. So now chapter 18 is going to show us people and how they relate to Babylon and how they react to Babylon. We'll show how we ought to relate to Babylon in our own day. First, look at the crime of Babylon in verse number 3. Why is Babylon destroyed? All the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. And of course, below, Babylon is referred to as, or back in chapter 17, she's referred to as the mother of prostitutes. I want to think about that metaphor for a second. To think of the metaphor of adultery or the metaphor of this immorality and why that is a picture of what's going on with the sinful city, with the city of man. And there's two things that you have to make this metaphor work. First of all, there is an enticement. And second of all, there's a price that's paid. That's how the metaphor works. There's got to be enticement and there's a price that's paid. And then you can use this metaphor and say Babylon is the mother of prostitutes. Okay, so first of all, what's the enticement that's going on here? Well, we're going to look at this in more detail, but it's clear that the enticement, what does Babylon have to offer? What are they luring people in with? What is the beauty of Babylon? It is the luxurious lifestyle that she offers. She offers a luxurious lifestyle. And this is a clue. Now, this is an element that we haven't seen a whole lot so far in the book of Revelation. We've talked about political power. We've talked about religious false teachers. But so far, we've left out, for the most part, this very big piece of the world that you and I live in, the economic side of our world. And this chapter is showing us that there's something very dark and very demonic that goes on in the economic part of human life. And the main thing is that it's a form of enticement. It's a form of enticement. In the day of, that's the first part of the metaphor. The second part of the metaphor is there's a price that's paid. What's the price that's paid? The price that's paid is capitulation to idols. Bow down to the idols, and then you can have all of this beauty. You can have all of these luxurious goods. Notice verse 3 as it goes on. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. So you see those two pieces of the puzzle? There's the draw, the allure, the enticement of excessive luxuries, of a luxurious lifestyle. The price that's paid is bowing down to idols. And this, again, we've talked about how this worked. In the Roman Empire, it was pay to play. There was lots of ways to get rich in the Roman Empire. But to be part of that system, you often had a very difficult choice to make. You had to capitulate. You had to bow down. You had to show your loyalty. Where's the place that we've seen this already in the book of Revelation? The mark of the beast, right? What was the mark of the beast all about? No man can buy or sell. You can't play unless you pay. You can't be part of this getting rich system. You can't enjoy all the wonderful things that Rome has to offer unless you show your loyalty to her idols. So you see that? There's the enticement and the price. The enticement is, look at this material good. The price is capitulation to idols. Is that still going on in our world? Absolutely it is. Sure it is. Rome is a lifestyle. Notice verse 11 through 13. This is one of my favorite parts of this passage, the last verses that we read there. 11 through 13 describes all of the things that you can buy in Rome. This is like if you were to go through the fanciest market, the fanciest mall in Rome, these are the things that you could buy. Now, we read these things, and honestly, we are so rich that these things aren't even very appealing to us, right? Some of them are. But, this doesn't, whet our appetite, or this doesn't make us, we don't feel the allure, the enticement. But listen, a person in the first century to read this list, literally anything that you could dream of wanting is on this list. Everything you would want to be rich for is on this list. This is the things that they want to get. So if you imagine John's readers reading this, and they read this list of all this stuff, and it's all the stuff on their Christmas list. It's all the stuff that they would really like to get. So this list may not do it for you, but things that might trigger our covetousness in 2024 is to say that Babylon holds out different kinds of allure and enticement for us. Things like iPhones and Xboxes and Teslas and designer handbags and luxury clothing and exotic travel and fine dining, club memberships, Super Bowl tickets, backstage passes, vacation homes. That's more like our list. That's more like our list. So this is what's on offer, and basically all they have to do to be part of this system, to participate, is they must pay the price. They must show their loyalty to idols. Now, again, what these verses are trying to do is show how Babylon dazzles the senses. She sweeps you off your feet. The beauty takes you by surprise. And this is why, as Christians, we have to steel our hearts against covetousness. We have to steel our hearts against these things. Otherwise, we are vulnerable. You can fall into a trap unless your heart is made of steel when it comes to these things. The devil is always ready to make a deal. And where do we see this most clearly in Scripture? All the temptations of Jesus Christ, right? Where the devil, our enemy, the same devil we're waging war against today, makes the ultimate offer to Christ and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and says, I'll give you all of this if you'll bow down. It's the same price, it's the same allure, right? All the things that the world has to offer for the price of your worship. Your worship. Turn your worship away from God. So these products, of course, are generally fine in themselves. But notice, it's bait. And the pleasure will not last. And this same attractive system is used as a hammer on the saints, as we talked about with the mark of the beast. Rome has all these things, yes, but that means Rome can also withhold all of these things. And if you refuse to bow down to the idol, they can hold back all of the goodness. And again, it is not unthinkable that members of our church, our congregation, our family of believers will lose their job or their livelihood over faithfulness to Christ. One of the things I would exhort us as a church is to be ready for that, to be ready to support one another financially when that day comes, to do what we have to do to take care of each other when those choices have to be made. The devil is always ready to make a deal, though, and that's the main thing here. But so look at at the very end of the chapter, down in verse 24. See how she treats God's people. In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. Oh, so Babylon, she looks real beautiful. She looks real beautiful. But you go searching in her house and you find the bodies. You find the blood of God's holy people there. And I would tell people, before you, if someone's not a Christian, this is very difficult for non-Christians to understand. And remember this, if you're trying to share the gospel with a friend who's not a believer, they find it very difficult to understand what on earth they've done that's so bad that would deserve hell, that would deserve the judgment of God. I mean, honestly, they're like, I'm a pretty good person. I mean, some of us have friends that aren't very good people. Most of them go to jail, right? You're like, not in jail. You're like, I'm a pretty good person, right? But we have to see there's a sign that you're on the wrong side, that your lack of worshiping God is a very serious problem. And the best way to see that is the way it treats people, the way it treats people. Notice this list of goods, they sound really nice. And, maybe we sit there as 21st century people and say, well, I don't know. Maybe cinnamon and spice can be ethically sourced, right? Maybe you can have all these things ethically sourced. But there's one item on the list that makes us as modern people squirm a little bit. Look at the last thing that's for sale. Verse 13. And human beings sold as slaves, the bodies and souls of men. That shows us what's really going on in Rome. It is a system that destroys and devalues human life. Now, again, we can look at our nation, and again, we might feel like, hey, our systems, we're pretty good. It's a pretty good place, a nice place to live. We have to look at the human cost, though. Is it a system that consumes human lives through things like pornography, abortion, and an ideology that refuses to punish lawbreakers? What is the result of all those things? Death, blood. And that's the system that you're part of. So if you're just part of the system, you feel like, I think everything's good here. I like it here. I hope nothing changes. I hope we can stay here in Babylon with all the stuff they've got for sale. You're not observing the full effects of the system that you're part of, the way it consumes human lives. Now notice throughout the passage, a couple places it says, it's all going to be over. It's all going to be over in 1 hour. Look at verse number 10 that we read. Woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour, your doom has come. Look back up in verse 8. Therefore, in 1 day, her plagues will overtake her. You say, well, which one is it? Is it a day or is it an hour? It don't matter. What's the idea? Like that, and it's over. She seems like she stood for a long time, but suddenly, it all comes crashing down. It comes to a halt. That emphasizes that it comes to a sudden ruin, and that Babylon, no matter how strong it seems, is only temporary. It's only temporary. Now, when I first read that, to be honest, I was like, well, that doesn't seem like a very good point to me. Because honestly, Rome lasted for how long? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Right? So you're telling me, like, hey, listen, you're all invested in Rome, but guess what? It's all going to come crashing down. What am I going to say? Yeah, like 500 years from now, what do I care? It's going to be great while I'm alive. But you see, Revelation has a different viewpoint, doesn't it? Revelation has an eternal viewpoint. It says, don't park your soul in Babylon. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If you park your heart in Babylon, when Babylon is done, you're done. You're done, right? We were made not for Babylon, for a city that's passing away. We were not made for the city of man, the city of destruction. We were made for the eternal city, the city of God, and we must not be satisfied with anything less. And to trade away access to the city of God for the gold and silver and junk that Babylon's got for sale in its markets is a foolish, foolish exchange. It's a foolish trade. The world mourns, and that's why you get all of this. Verse 10, woe to you, great city. Verse 11, the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her. What's everybody crying about? They're done. Because literally, all of their money, everything they had was wrapped up in Babylon. They had nothing outside of Babylon. Every ounce of hope they had was tied up in Babylon. So if Babylon is no more, they have nothing left. And friends, people in our world today, literally everything they have is wrapped up in the sinful world order. Everything they've got. And if the world falls, what do they have left? They have nothing. They have nothing, and that's why they mourn here, because all of their hopes were based in Babel. Verse 21, you get this very vivid parable thing. Verse 21, a mighty angel picks up a boulder and chucks it into the sea and says, with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. Right? Now, not just back then, but even now, something that big falls into the ocean, it's over. You're not getting that back. Like, it's gone, right? You guys remember the submarine wreck disaster thing? I don't know if that was last year, where the submarine went down to visit the Titanic and it imploded, right? Remember, I was blown away by that. It's like they're like, yeah, we don't know what happened. We can't get down there. No one can go down there. We have no idea. It's just lost. It's like, it's 2024. You guys can't get down to the bottom of the ocean. Like, no, they can't. They have the way to do it, right? So, in other words, this idea of throwing this boulder into the sea is to say, that's it. Period. Done. It's irrecoverable. The ruin of Babylon will be irrecoverable. So that's kind of the same idea there. And then it describes what this finality means. This is really interesting. Look at verse 21. I'm sorry, verse 22. The music of harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Get the idea? It's over. All of those things. Now, what are those things? If you go back and look at what those different things that are all gone forever. They represent just normal, happy human existence. That's just normal life. Filled with things like celebrations, work, family, the home, love, marriage. It's over. All of those things come to an end. And I found that so interesting because there's a lot of people, I think, today who are happy without God as long as they can keep a normal life. It's like, as long as I have a normal, happy, healthy life, I don't need God. But what this passage is telling you is, unless you know God, unless you know him through his son Christ Jesus, all of those things are doomed. You'll lose them all. You can't have it both ways. You can't have the one and not the other. And I can't remember where I was hearing this, but I was listening to someone talking about politics and this demographic in our country they call grill dads or something like that. What are grill dads? Grill dads are dudes who are largely conservative and they generally vote conservative, but all they want to really do is be left at home with their grill. You guys can relate to that? Just leave me alone. Let me be at home with my grill. I don't want to watch a debate. I don't want to hear about all these issues. I don't want to read a bunch of articles. Dude, just let me be at home and grill. They call them grill dads, right? They're not really interested in politics. They don't want to be involved, but they just want to be left alone to enjoy their little corner of the world. I would say in the same way, there's a very large demographic who isn't interested in God. They just want to be left alone to grill, garden, game, grandparent, gossip, Google. Those are all the things I can think of started with G. They just want to be left alone. But no world without God will be left standing. There is no corner of this world that you'll be able to keep to yourself. For all the world will be filled with the knowledge of God from the east unto the west. Now, why would that be? Because that's what you were made for. You were made to know God. You were made to know God, and the only reason that you live now, the only reason you have breath in your lungs, the only reason you have food, the only reason you have anything is because of God's goodness. Okay? And so here's the choice you have. You either get more of God's goodness or less of God's goodness. But this whole business we got going on right now, we're all kind of on life support with God, that's not going to last. It's not going to last. 1,000,000 years from now, you'll either have way, way more of God's goodness or you'll have way, way less of God's goodness. It's one or the other. So, there's no way to keep a normal life without God. So the message for Christians, there's a couple of messages here for Christians I want you to notice. Look at verse 4. I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people. Come out of her, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." Now, does this mean that they're supposed to pack up and leave town? Well, just move out of the big city. Like, that's clearly where all the problem is. That's where Rome is. Now, I'll be honest, sometimes that's what it means. Sometimes you don't have a choice. But notice that it clarifies, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins. Okay, here's the thing. Wherever you live, you have to make a commitment in your heart that you are not going to compromise with the sin of Babylon. You're not going to compromise with idolatry. These verses actually refers to several verses in the Old Testament. So maybe you remember this. Dick, a couple weeks ago, mentioned how Israel living in Babylon, in the original Babylon, back in the day. They lived in the original Babylon, and God was letting them know that they should settle down. He said, settle down. Seek the peace of the city that you're in, because you're going to be there for a while. They said, how long are we going to be here? He said, 70 years. So get comfortable. You're going to be there for 70 years. So settle down, build houses, plant gardens. Make yourselves at home, because you're going to be there for a while. But later on in the book of Jeremiah, the Lord gives them a picture of the future. You know what he says? Come out, come out, come out. It's time. No, it's not an instruction of them. It's a promise. They said, you feel like you're left here forever, but you're not there forever. It's a fascinating verse in Jeremiah chapter 51, where it pictures God's people leaving Babylon. And Babylon is on fire. They're leaving the city, and smoke is billowing up to the sky. Fiery sulfur is raining down in the city like Sodom and Gomorrah. And God's people are leaving, going to their home. They've been saved, rescued by God. And listen to what God's people say. We would have healed Babylon, but she cannot be healed. Let us leave her and each go to our own land. Oh, we would have. We wanted to. Again, so you see the tension there. While we're here, we're going to work just as hard as if we were trying to heal Babylon. So what are we going to do in America, folks? We're going to try to heal it. We're going to try our best to heal her. What are we going to do for Ohio and Middletown? We're going to do our best to heal her. And in the end, when the city of man burns to the ground and we're safely escorted into the city of God, we will say we would have, but she cannot be healed. That's what we see, and that's this passage here is also a promise. Come out of her, my people. It's a promise. God will not leave us here. We will not be the embattled minority forever. We will not be the people who are threatened by Babylon forever. Eventually, we will be rescued and brought home to the city that God has built for his people. So it means don't share in her sins. Don't buy into the shiny allure of the city of Babylon. I read an interesting book this past week. I'd recommend it to you. I think it'd be a very edifying read for you, for your family, maybe for husbands and wives to read together. It's called Life in the Negative World by a man named Aaron Renn, who's a Christian. He's not a theologian or anything, but he's writing his understanding of what it's like to be a Christian in 2024 and giving some advice. And he had some really interesting things to say about how we're interacting as we're living in Babylon, and how basically we've lost, as evangelical Christians, we've largely lost any sway in a lot of institutions in our world. So listen to what he says. We, meaning Christians like you and me, we don't run society's major institutions anymore. We barely have a seat at the table in them sometimes. Our core values are now in disfavor. It means people don't like what Christians stand for right now. He said, evangelicals need to learn to act like a minority and spend more time and effort focused on sustaining their own communities and beliefs. This doesn't mean they should resign themselves to doing nothing or no longer caring about the country. Okay? So he says, listen, and he goes on in the book and he talks about some suggestions for how we as Christians can do just that. How we can build strong communities, strong families, strong institutions, even while we're here in Babylon. So that's the first piece of advice he gives. Don't share in the sins of Babylon. Make a resolution in your heart that you will not compromise, that you will not rob God of his worship. Remember, that's what we're talking about. I don't think in America that you're in any danger of being told you must bow down to this shrine. Maybe in the month of June, but maybe not in America. But there may be pressure to get you to stop worshiping God the way you do now. Commend you. You're in church. You're churchgoers. You worship God. Could there ever be a pressure to make you stop doing that? Absolutely. Absolutely. You pray. You read the Bible. You fear God. Is there going to be any pressure to make you stop doing that? Most certainly. So, what we have to see is we have to see what we are destined for. I think one of the things this passage is doing wants you to see what you're destined for. It wants you to see what Babylon is destined for. We are destined for greater things. But Babylon is doomed. Babylon is destined to be destroyed. This passage also teaches us that covetousness is deadly. Covetousness is deadly. It deceives us. Now, what is covetousness? I want to be careful here because I think as Christians we can be too quick to call any desire to get anything covetousness. Like maybe you want a better job than the one you have. Is that covetousness? Maybe you want to make more money this year than you did last year. Are you covetous? Maybe you want to have a slightly nicer car than you have. Are you covetous? Like, how are we supposed to think about these things? Dutch theologian Herman Bavinck, Reformed theologian, in his book on ethics, talks about how the medieval church, so we think of the church of the Middle Ages, came to believe that poverty was like the ideal thing for a Christian. Like the best thing you could be as a Christian is poor. And I think we still have a little bit of that in our hearts. We still feel like a little guilty that we have anything, right? That we have money. Like we're always told, like, there's Christians on the other side of the world. They've got nothing. And so we start to feel guilty. Like, well, if I was a real Christian, maybe I would have nothing. But Bavinck goes on to say, the Reformation restored the rights of the natural, meaning the natural good. Is it good to have money? Yeah. Is it good to have a house? Yeah. Is it good to have a job and a car and retirement savings? Yeah, it's good. And the Reformation restored those rights and said, no, natural good is good. It's a gift from God. That's a wonderful thing. It's not merely, so he said, the basic rule is property must be used for the purpose for which God created it. Not just to alleviate our want, our need, but also for making life more pleasant. He says, God also created flowers and gave gold, silver, and ivory their glitter and glamour. He says intemperance must be avoided as well by thanking God for his gift. Gratitude and intemperance cannot go together. So he gives 3 little rules. You might jot these down. 3 little rules to help you decide between covetous, unlawful desire and good, God-honoring, lawful desire. The first is wrong desire, or unlawful desire, desires a wrong thing. You may not covet things that your neighbor owns because they're his. They can't be yours because they're his. There are things that are wrong to want. The second thing is a wrong reason or a wrong motivation. Like, why do you want those things? You want those things because you want to be a big deal? Because you want to be better than other people? You want those things so you no longer have to trust God? And the third one is a wrong action. So, wrong thing, wrong reason, wrong action. I mean, you do the wrong thing to get them. So in other words, you try to game the system or you cheat in order to enrich yourself. That's wrong. That's covetousness. All 3 of those things mean covetousness. But here's the thing. The second one, we can't really judge other people's hearts. I can't look at Alex and be like, I see, Alex, what you're trying to do. You're trying to get a better job. I think you have a wrong motivation. It's like, maybe, but I can't judge Alex. The first and the third one, Alex is chasing after a wrong thing, or he's doing something wrong to get it. I can judge those things. I cannot judge his heart. He can't judge my heart. And it's very difficult to know our own hearts. So that second one about a wrong reason, yeah, if you're chasing after trying to, improve your family's economic standing, you're seeking a better job, you want this, you want that, you see an advertisement that's caught your eye, that's all great, but do examine your heart. Do examine your heart. So that's what Bavinck has to say about the difference between lawful and unlawful desire. But last, I'll notice verse number 20. Here's another thing we're supposed to do as Christians. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you. Is it legitimate for Christians to rejoice over God judging those who shed the blood of Christians, who persecute Christians, and who celebrate idols. Yes, it is legitimate. And you better get used to it because we'll be doing a whole bunch of it in heaven. We will rejoice over God's victory. We're not gleeful over the doom of sinners, but we are happy that it is over. We're happy when the war is over. We will rejoice in the streets when the war is over. So, unbeliever, if you're not a Christian, this passage tells us that the day is coming, and it is coming very soon, when you're separated from all of your luxuries. Now, you might be separated from your luxuries 50 years, 70 years, 80 years from now, but you'll be separated from them. And not only that, the whole world will be. The whole system of Babylonian luxury will come crashing down. And it might take 500 years, it might take 1,000 years, it might take 10,000 years, but a day is coming where that whole time will seem to have flown by, and will seem to be a drop in the bucket, and will seem to have been a very, very foolish trade. The wonderful news of Revelation is that God is building a new city. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to build that new city. And Jesus Christ alone shows us the way. Because on that place where he saw all the kingdoms of the world that were all offered to him, he did what none of us could do. He said no. He said no to all of that. Conquered all temptation, did not compromise. Only his worship was fully devoted. Every one of us, our worship is all over the place. We're just wildcat worshipers, just worshiping all over the place. But only the worship of Jesus Christ was a focused beam directed directly to the Father. And yet, he died the death that idolaters deserve to die. He died the death of those who, the death that we deserve as people who do not worship God. Remember we said, in the end, you'll lose all the goodness of God. What is the cross all about? The cross is watching the goodness of God drain away from a human life until nothing is left. He did that so that we could receive God's goodness forever and ever. And I would say to everyone, you are not banned. Come out of Babylon. Come out of Babylon and come in. This is a wonderful picture in The Pilgrim's Progress. One of my favorite moments in the book. It's where Christian is living in the city of destruction. He lives in the city of destruction, and he says, I saw in my dream the man began to run, meaning Christian, with a burden on his back. He began to run. And he had not run far from his own door. He's like, I'm going to run to the heavenly city. I'm getting out of here. This is a city doomed. So he's running, and he'd not run far from his door. His wife and his children saw him leave, and they began to shout after him to return. But the man put his fingers in his ears and ran on crying, life, life, eternal life. And very, very often in the world, that's exactly what we have to do. Put our fingers in our ears so we don't hear what Babylon has to say. And remember that we are focused on life with God forever. Let's pray.